Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast on anti-Semitism. My name is Paul Norris. I live in San Francisco. I'm a state coordinator and a leader of the Red Caucus in San Francisco. And I am actually also non-Jewish. And my co-host is Randy Lioz. Randy, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, great to be here, Paul. And so I'm Senior Director of Events and Partner Engagement at Braver Angels. And I do come from a Jewish background, but I've never really been very religious. But actually, in more recent years, my Jewish identity and my Braver Angels identity really started to overlap more. I've been holding Seders with my friends, especially my non-Jewish friends, for many years. And during the pandemic, I actually started doing Braver Seders via Zoom. And I just love the way that the lessons from the holiday of Passover and the ideas that Braver Angels is built upon really seem to intersect. So I've been excited to kind of deepen that link in recent years. So really excited to be part of this conversation.
Great. And Rina, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Okay, happy to be here. My name is Rina Bernards. I'm here in Maryland, and I have my role in Braver Angels has primarily been as a moderator. I was in the first graduating class of moderators in 2017. In 2019, I developed a workshop called the Common Ground Workshop, which we now have used around the country to focus on a single issue and try to come up with agreement between Reds and Blues on that issue. And right now, one thing I'm working on in Braver Angels is the Trustworthy Elections campaign. It's a national campaign, and I've been very involved in that.
Great. Randy Freeman, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Randy Freeman, and I've also been involved with Braver Angels since early 2017. And I'm a New York State coordinator and a moderator. And I'm also a recently retired psychotherapist that did a lot of bridge building between couples. And so I kind of moved to a new kind of bridge building. And I'm just very interested in this topic and probably always have been. And Rina and I have developed a relationship over it. So more to discuss.
Can I add that I'm also a family therapist? This is something that Randy and I have in common.
Well, gee, so am I.
Yeah, I'm the only one here who's not. So it's nice to be invited into your world. So that's cool. So to start off the conversation, we really wanted to hear about the story of your friendship together, Rina and Randy. I know that there's a lot of interesting background to it, and also the story of how that Common Ground workshop that we did recently around the issue of anti-Semitism arose. So, Randy F., would you like to start off with the story of your friendship through Braver Angels?
Sure. I think Rina and I were actually pretty responsible Facebook discussers of things, and we started disagreeing on Facebook pretty vehemently about Israel and what constitutes sort of anti-Semitism around the state of Israel. And I found myself getting upset, of course, but what I did was either I reached out to you or you reached out to me. I don't remember. I reached out to you.
Me.
And I said, Rina, let's talk in person on Zoom and really have a deep discussion rather than quibbling on Facebook, which I highly recommend to everybody when you get into a discussion that just starts feeling tense. Rina and I met by Zoom, and we spoke. Rina, you just said it was for an hour and a half about our beliefs, where they came from, our values, what's underlying it, what brought us to our beliefs. And even though we continue to disagree on this topic, I have the utmost respect for Rina, and I believe Rina has the utmost respect for me. So that's how we got started in our friendship.
Yeah, and I will say that whenever something happens, it could be something happening in Israel, it could be something about anti-Semitism, we'll get back in touch. We'll send each other an email or get on a Zoom to talk about it. But we have one of those red, blue, Braver Angel friendships that I think is really valuable.
Absolutely. And so do you want to talk about the way that Common Ground workshop came about? Because that was, I actually attended that workshop myself. I was a participant. It was really fantastic. It was a great experience. And so I would love to hear the story of how that arose.
One of the things that was going on for me is that I was getting increasingly bothered by the amount of anti-Semitism I was hearing about in our country. In my mind, both on the left and on the right. And a friend of mine who's not Jewish and who's more conservative actually contacted me, and she goes, "Randy, why aren't they talking about this in Braver Angels?" And I was thinking about it. I said, we're working on depolarizing, but polarization of a country is one of the things that causes the country to fall apart. And when countries and societies fall apart, one of the things that come bubbling up is anti-Semitism. So I thought, well, we really need to talk about that as part of Braver Angels. So I reached out to Rina. I think, Randy, you were in that initial conversation, and we soon discovered that we had a huge amount of disagreement among us Jewish people in Braver Angels. Rina, I'll let you continue a little bit.
Sure. So we decided that before we could bring Braver Angels to bring the issue of anti-Semitism to the broader community, that we needed to have a conversation among the Jews in Braver Angels and amongst the Reds and the Blues to see where we could coalesce and where we could agree. And we thought about the structure and we played with it. And finally, we decided to ask Bill Doherty and John Schrenkler to moderate a workshop for 8 Red Jews and 8 Blue Jews. And we focused on what defines anti-Semitism and what can be done about it.
I think there's something really important here, so we use this term anti-Semitism, and I'm not sure that all of our listeners have the same idea of that as you do. So I'm wondering, painful as it might be, if we could at least mention some specifics so that listeners know exactly what we're talking about.
Well, the name anti-Semitism comes from the fact that Jews are a Semite people, but it's kind of an old-fashioned name because there are other Semites, and it really means anti-Jewish oppression. And Jews have a long history of oppression that goes back 2,000 years. And an important thing to know about Jewish oppression is that it's cyclical. So there was the Inquisition, there was the Crusades, and then the Inquisition. And then after the Inquisition, there were periods of calm, let's say, particularly in Spain, where it was considered the Golden Age, and Jews were very much a part of what was going on. And then it comes up again. And then in Eastern Europe, there's the pogroms, leading to the biggest catastrophe of the Holocaust. So one of the things about Jews and anti-Semitism is because we know it's cyclical, we never quite feel safe.
Yes.
And we never know when it's going to come up again. And the fact that here in the United States, although there have been periods of more intense anti-Semitism and recently maybe a revival, overall we've been successful and part of the establishment and fairly safe in the United States. But as Jews, that's not a reassurance to feel like, okay, we've licked this problem, because it has been cyclical throughout history.
Yeah, and Jews were quite successful in Germany, and it didn't really make a difference. And I think for a lot of people, they see Jews as successful, and I have my fingers in quotes. And so it's hard to reconcile, well, you're living okay, you're not oppressed, so you don't have a problem. Well, there is a problem. The other thing I'd like to mention, and I just looked it up before we met because I remember this, and I forgot the exact date, but it was 1965 when the Catholic Church held something called Nostra Aetate, which is where they actually said that the Jews were not responsible for the killing of Christ. But for a very long time, that was one of the reasons that people, like right before Easter, a lot of the pogroms happened, and Jews were attacked and killed and raped and marauded in Eastern Europe. That's why my grandparents came, because of the pogroms. They came to the United States. So it's sort of under the surface. The Catholic Church has done a lot to change the tone of what is said about who killed Jesus, but it's always been there. And a lot, recently there's been more violence against Jews. There's been violence against Hasidic Jews. Somebody actually said to me, some woman that was, my husband happens to know her husband. She said, well, maybe Hitler was right. About killing Hasidic Jews. And I'm like, I was like aghast at it. And it's sort of like there's this almost like this permission right now to be anti-Semitic, which I find very bothersome and worrisome.
Yeah, Randy, you said something about when there's social upheaval, that there tend to be that anti-Semitism tends to rear its head in those moments. And I'm wondering, I've definitely heard lots of ideas about, why Jews have been scapegoated for, ills of society, things about being middlemen and certain roles that we've played. But what are your thoughts about why that tends to happen, why it is cyclical, and what tends to trigger these sorts of things?
I think that there's, yeah, both are excited about this issue. We'll be jumping in. I think that there is the religious roots of anti-Semitism. There's also the scapegoating in terms of the economy. So Jews were seen as the bankers and the business owners and the money lenders. Partially, as we know in Braver Angels, there's a kernel of truth to stereotypes, partially because Jews were not allowed to do anything else. So money lending was something that Jews went into. At the same time, one stereotype about Jews is that we're communists and want to overthrow the state. And so we kind of get it from both ends. And I think it's important to say that this revival of anti-Semitism that's happening now goes along with a revival of all kinds of hate against minority groups. And just today, really just today, November 30th, Homeland Security came out with a warning that there's increased threats of anti-Semitism and increased threats against LGBTQ community. So this instigation of hate goes together. And one of the things that speaks to me is that we need to unite with other groups who are oppressed.
If I could weigh in for a moment, I saw some of this in graduate school, which was about 10 years ago. And the form that I saw it take was championing of the Palestinians and seeing the Palestinians as oppressed and the Jews as the oppressors. And you could feel that in the tenor of how people were treated in classes, how the Jewish people really, really kept their heads down, and how the Palestinians were, sort of given this aura and this really approval.
Well, I just want to say that I want to give a little bit of my background. My father was a rabbi. My mother was a Hebrew school teacher. I went to Jewish day schools all my life as a young child. My family was early Zionist settlers. My grandmother had 5 brothers and sisters from Russia who settled in what was then called Palestine in the 1880s. So I was steeped in Jewish culture, Jewish Zionism, and so forth. When I got to be I'd say in my 20s, I started worrying about Israel in a different way. And I became more knowledgeable about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I devoted about 15 to 20 years of my work life working on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, working towards a just solution and a two-state solution. So I don't like to see it in terms of who's right or wrong. I think that both peoples need each other, need to come to an agreement with each other. So, and currently, yes, currently there is a lot of oppression of Palestinians in Israel. Now, how that gets expressed and how that gets talked about is really important, and really important that it doesn't go in over the line into anti-Semitism, but it is a reality that I think we need to face.
Yeah. No, it's a reality, and I don't know that we want to get into the whole Israeli-Palestinian issue right now, because, like I said, Rina and I could probably spend 2 hours, 3 hours talking about it. It's very complicated, and my own, my history is I've been to Israel, and I was 3 times, and I was one of the times I was there was on through a program called Honest Reporting, which was really about how they see Israel being reported about in the media and why there are distortions in the media. So I'm coming from a very different vantage point than Rina. I did meet Arab Israelis there, and also, as we were going to talk about at the AIPAC conference that I went to.
Maybe we should tell that story.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I, as part of being part of this movement of Jews towards Israeli-Palestinian peace, there's a group of young Jews who organized a protest at AIPAC because they felt like this organization that is the major pro-Israel organization in the community was not giving enough time towards the goal of ending occupation. So some young people in my friends group came to Washington, and we all went down to a protest at AIPAC. So then about a year later, after Randy and I had developed this friendship, I get an email from Randy, and she says, "My husband and I are going to the AIPAC conference. Are you going to be protesting outside? If so, let's meet for coffee."
That's great.
And that was like one of my favorite Braver Angels message I ever got. And actually, we did end up going to dinner.
We did meet for coffee, but the whole story is while we were waiting for you, I literally got accosted by a Palestinian protester who figured out that I was at the AIPAC conference, and literally the person who was with her had to pull her off of us. She was like screaming at us and in our faces. So it was a very disturbing and upsetting meeting before the meeting. I had a very nice time. Ken and I had a nice time with you and Tom.
Right.
Yeah, so one of the issues that we explored in that Common Ground workshop was the line between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. And we did say, that there was a conclusion from the workshop that everyone agreed upon. Criticism of Israel can be an expression of anti-Semitism, but in and of itself is not anti-Semitism. And so, and I think this is also a good entree to the idea of possibly how Reds and Blues tend to see the issue a little bit differently, because I think there were some differences there, right? Do you two want to talk about how you see those personally? Maybe how you think that Reds and Blues see it differently?
I think, for one, I do know a lot of liberals who are very supportive of Israel in the way that I am, and maybe some conservatives weren't. So it's not a clear delineation between conservatives and liberals. But I do believe that anybody should criticize Israel just like they would criticize I would criticize my country, and I'd criticize Israel. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that when that criticism crosses the line to demonizing the people who may be Zionists, who may support Israel, attacking them physically or demonizing them in some way or shutting down their voices, which does happen on college campuses. I think that's problematic. But I think criticism of Israel, I'll criticize Israel. I'll tell you what I think that I'm critical of, but same way I'll criticize my own country.
And I agree with everything Randy said. The problem is that sometimes when people are criticizing Israel, be it Palestinians or progressive Jews or others, or progressives in general, there sometimes is a chilling effect by saying you're being anti-Semitic. And just like, as you said, pro-Israel voices can be censored on college campuses, I think pro-peace voices as well, and pro-Palestinian voices. And I know you disagree, Randy. Let me just finish. So my concern, and I think other blues in the room when we talked about this, is let's not use anti-Semitism at the threat of being called anti-Semitic as a way to chill conversations that really need to happen.
Yeah. I think, at least from what I've read and what I hear about in the most recent things, the Rutgers College campus, a bunch of Palestinians were standing outside of a Jewish fraternity and were screaming at the Jewish fraternity members who may or may not have been Zionists, and yelling at them that they were Zionists, whatever. In a very derogatory and terrible and frightening way for those students. I think more often than not on the college campuses, it's not the Jews that are being, it's not the Palestinians that are being shut down. It's more the Jews that are being shut down. My experience also, and I think I told you about this, Rina, when my husband went to school at Yale, the anti-Semitism was so great surrounding the issue of Israel that they wound up hiring a Black Jew to work at Hillel for a year, thinking that maybe some of the liberal people on campus would listen to her talk about, both sides about Israel. There are lots of different viewpoints. My granddaughter goes to Ithaca College, and just 2 weeks ago, somebody carved swastikas on the piano in the music hall and put swastikas other places. And I asked her, what did they do about it? She says, well, they had a program. They had somebody come and speak. I said, did you go? She goes, no. She says it wasn't very good. So
right. And on college campuses, there's anti-Semitism coming from the right and from the left. But I do want to go back to this piece about censorship. So, for example, Hillel International, B'nai B'rith Hillel, they have a policy that if you support boycott, divest, and sanction, which is a way to express criticism of Israel in a concrete way. It's a nonviolent, concrete way. I'm not saying I'm a supporter of it. I think it has a legitimate free speech right. Hillel says any speaker, be they Jewish, Palestinian, or otherwise, that supports BDS cannot be sponsored by a Hillel. And that means that Hillel can never sponsor a Palestinian, because the majority of Palestinians see BDS as a way to support their cause. So this is censorship coming from the other side. And I'm not saying that the Palestinians don't stand up. They tend to, there's a wonderful book, The Conflict About the Conflict. I suggest people read that. In it, it's, in fact, the guy that wrote one of the definitions of anti-Semitism wrote this book. And he said, what Palestinians tend to do on college campus is use their, disrupting voice. That's what they can do. They can stand outside and scream. Jews tend to do it in an organized way, where they may go to the president and say, this speaker should not come, or they have the organization of Hillel all around the country not allow any certain speakers to speak. So it's very different. It's very different approach. And I think we have to admit that both happen. And I have to say, my favorite thing that came out of our workshop was a solution. And I'm going to read it. It says, we need to promote free speech on college campuses so that speakers who are pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian can present their side. And I think that's so important.
Okay, I'll agree with you about that, and that is the common ground we came to, because I can list a handful of speakers that were basically chased off college campuses because they were pro-Israeli. So, and I think they deserve a voice, and I think Palestinians deserve a voice. And wouldn't it be wonderful if they could be like brave angels and come together and have some kind of meeting of the minds and plan for the country? But yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so that was a point of agreement during our common ground.
Right.
Excellent. So Paul, did you want to? You're still muted. Were you trying to jump in?
Yeah, I was trying to use the space bar, which all of a sudden stopped working. So one of the things that I have come to understand, which you may or may not agree with, is have the Palestinians ever been willing to actually be a peace partner? If we go back, way back to Arafat, who in English would give speeches of peace, and in Arabic would give speeches of destruction of Israel. And one of the things that I've heard said is, well, Israel would love to have peace, but you can't make peace unless you have a peace partner, somebody who's actually willing to make a deal and stick to it. Do you see the validity in that?
I would rather stick to the topic of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that could get us off into, I've met Palestinians that are pro-peace. I've met Palestinians who are not. I've met Israelis who are pro-peace. I've met Israelis who are not. And I just think that this is not going to get us closer to understanding anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd be happy to talk more afterwards, but I think we'll go off because again, Rina and I could talk an hour and a half, 2 hours on this topic. And I think what we really want to communicate is that there is anti-Semitism on college campuses. Killings of people recently in our country, death threats. Recently, they basically closed down almost every synagogue in New Jersey because there was a huge death threat, and they had to, have people protecting the synagogues until they found who was doing the threats. And then same thing in New York. Shortly after that. It's terrifying. And I think every Jew that I know, and I don't know about you, Rina and Randy, they've been talking about this. And I was even listening to another podcast where they were saying almost every Jew wants to make sure they have their passport, which is insane. We're scared. And like Rina said, anti-Semitism is cyclical. So we never quite feel comfortable because when is it going to get bad? When is it going to get dangerous? I don't think it's at the point of being really dangerous, but I'm scared. I'm really scared. And that's why I brought it up to Rina and Randy and a few other people. Let's talk about this in Braver Angels.
Yeah.
Right. And we've talked about the college campuses, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's been a rise of white supremacist groups that threaten all minorities, and the bomb threats and the killing in Pittsburgh synagogue of 12 Jews. This has come from the increase of hate that's been unleashed. Yeah,
for me, I think we mentioned that especially my generation, so I'm 42 years old, and growing up, I don't have any strong memories of anti-Semitism. A few years ago, the experience that really haunted me was I was about to bring some leftovers from my Passover Seder down to a Braver Angels group in San Diego. And that happened right after the attack on the synagogue in Poway, which is in the San Diego area. And so that really hit home for me. And it was the first time where I really felt, some sort of existential threat, where it felt real. And so there's definitely a very big difference that can happen in, there's one of our good friends at Braver Angels lives in the Nashville area, and has said that, her experience there, anti-Semitism is more tangible than in other places that she's lived. And so I definitely understand that my experience is not universal, and it's very different from others. So I'm interested in some of the details of how anti-Semitism is actually expressed. And like recently, we've seen people like Kanye West and Kyrie Irving promoting a video that essentially talks about anti-Semitic tropes. And one of those is the denial of the Holocaust, right? And I think this is a really important thing to kind of dig into. Both groups in our Common Ground workshops said denying the Holocaust existed is anti-Semitic. And it seems somewhat obvious, since it's been a feature of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic rhetoric for many years. But if someone doesn't understand why denial is actually a form of anti-Semitism, like, how would you explain that?
Well, I would say, if you said, well, there was no slavery, that's pretty anti-Black and anti their experience. There was, I think every Jewish person I know has a family member or many family members that were killed during the Holocaust, myself included, and I obviously didn't meet them because they were dead. But I have a whole, like, maybe 3 arms of my family and maybe an arm of my husband's family, 2 arms, that were just lopped off during the Holocaust. Multiply me to every Jew in this country that has been here, say, from Eastern Europe in the early 20th century. We all have relatives. So it happened. I mean, I know it happened. It's been part of my DNA and my soul from the time I was like 7 years old, and I knew about it. So there's no question, and history shows that it happens. I think that the denial of the Holocaust is a big form of anti-Semitism that we can all agree on.
Yeah, and I think, we're a number of us are therapists in this crowd. If you deny what somebody has been through in terms of abuse, even on an individual level, that is a major wiping out of that person, and a major kind of, you don't exist because I don't recognize that you've been hurt. Therefore, you could be hurt again. If I don't acknowledge that you were unsafe, you could be unsafe again. And I think that that's one of the raw things that gets to Jews about denying the Holocaust.
I'd like to underline this as a non-Jew. I mean, I certainly knew about the Holocaust in the general and as a historic event, but getting to know Jews and understanding that they had actually experienced a lopping off of part of their family really brought that home and gave me a lot more understanding of, the sensitivity that I was seeing, and made it far more understandable. So I really want to underline that, going from the knowing it's a historic event to knowing that somebody who is right across the room from you or who is on your screen, that is a part of their family history. That's a big step.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, Paul.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. And I think it's pretty, Rina, I resonated with what you say, because denial of what somebody else has experienced is really painful, because, on the one hand, it, and the other hand, somebody's saying it didn't happen, which makes it feel very unsafe. And in any family situation, that could be devastating.
Right.
I also wanted to mention, aside from the Holocaust, and I don't think a lot of people even know about this history, the early 20th century, Jews were not allowed in country clubs. Jews were not allowed in hospitals. Jews were not allowed in hotels. There's a movie called Gentleman's Agreement. Was that Gregory Peck? Where if your name was Greenberg, you couldn't get into a hotel. Jews weren't allowed into medical school. Jews, there were quotas against Jews on college campuses and graduate schools. I mean, there was a huge amount of discrimination, and a lot of our families went into their own businesses because that was the only way that they could survive in this country. Yeah, just wanted to bring that up because I think a lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting in light of what we were talking about before, the role that Jews have played in various societies. In terms of middlemen and money changers, bankers, things like that. And I think, Rina, you mentioned that wasn't necessarily all by choice, right? It was a product of the restrictions that were placed upon us. And so it was a survival mechanism, right? So I think that for people to understand that is an important aspect of this. There's something that I've been a conversation that I've been kind of engaged with on Facebook that has been really difficult for me because it has involved the comparison of anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. And so like the recent rhetoric from Ye and Kyrie Irving, it focuses a lot on the feeling among some Black people in the world of sports and entertainment that the Jewish people have unfairly profited off the labor of Black people. And it does seem to be based in an idea that it's at least somewhat legitimate that Jews have outsized representation in terms of in some of the areas of society, right? And so first of all, I wanted to pose the question: is it anti-Semitic to even talk about this and to say, look at all these Jews in banking and entertainment and things like that? But also, what would you say to someone who tells you that they're just talking about their own experience and how they've been taken advantage of by people with last names that end in Berg or Stein, right? And that is there, and to silence them is to do an injustice to them. How does one respond to that?
I think that I would remind them maybe about how they feel if people make generalizations about their particular group based on some experiences with that group. Are Jews an outsized presence in Hollywood? Maybe because they could be. I don't know. Certainly in sports, we're not wonderful athletes, so maybe we're better at the other part, which is managing a team than being on the team. But I mean, I don't know. And certainly some people may have had bad situations with Jewish landlords, but it doesn't mean all Jewish landlords are bad. And it doesn't mean, all tenants are good. Sometimes tenants can be really difficult and not pay their rent and all those kind of things. And somebody has to earn a living. So, I mean, I think making a generalization about any group is just wrong. In the same way that I would never make a generalization about another group and say that they are all one way or another. So, yeah. And is there a germ of truth? Yeah, maybe. I was thinking also about the whole notion of, I think the film that Kyrie Irving was promoting talked about Jewish slave owners. Yeah, there were Jewish slave owners. I did some research. I think there was like a very small percentage of Jewish slave owners, maybe large because we're not a big percentage of society, but most of them were not Jewish slave owners. So why single out us for being Jewish slave owners? I mean, there were a lot of slave owners back then. Look, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants discriminated against us and Catholics did, but that's history, and I hope that's behind us, and I wouldn't blame that whole group. So anyway, that's my thought.
Well, my thought is I don't think anything should be undiscussable. So if you want to talk about the role of Jews in society, Jews are a wealthy group. We have accumulated wealth currently in this country. And we are overrepresented in terms of our numbers in certain fields. There's nothing wrong with talking about that. But to talk about it as though it's a cabal of Jews that are in Hollywood and trying to screw over Black people, and, then I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong because it is promoting a misnomer about Jewish power. So we may be overrepresented but we're not, Jews aren't there trying to figure out how to kind of build that power because we're overrepresented in the field. And that's where I think it gets dangerous, because let's have the conversation. There's nothing wrong with the conversation, but it's how it's done and how it can encourage hate in the broader community. And that's where I think people have to recognize we are a vulnerable community, even though we have, more wealth, let's say, we're still a vulnerable community. And there still are haters out there. So that's why those kinds of expressions are worrisome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that makes me think about the differences in terms of anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. I've heard a lot of blue thinkers, in my experience at least, exploring the idea of whiteness and its gradual inclusion of especially recent immigrant groups, including Jews, right? And there seems to be a distinction made between anti-Semitism and other forms of racism based on the fact that most Jews, if not all, can pass for white, right? If other people don't consider us that, we still largely look very similar to other white folks, right? And though Jews have been targeted for other indicators like last names or, people, their clothing, especially if they're Hasidic Jews. And so how would you compare anti-Semitism with other forms of racism?
They're very different in many ways. Jews are a people, we're a religion, we're an ethnic group, we're an international group. And we have not experienced the worst form of anti-Semitism in the United States. I'm not saying anti-Semitism didn't exist here. Our worst experience was in Europe. And in Europe, we were victims of racism. We were victims of, the way we looked. We were considered a abomination as a part of humanity, and we were victims of genocide. And so, it's different here. It's different how anti-Semitism plays itself out here. And I do think that African Americans, where their worst catastrophe happened here. And so the legacy of that continues in a way that's different from us. So yeah, it's very different. But what's interesting is some of the same people hate both of us. So.
Well, maybe that says that we should get together with those people for whom lots of people hate and have them in front. But no, I was also thinking about the notion of, what happened to Blacks in this country and what happened to us in Eastern Europe, and also in this country, not the same way, but with the level of discrimination in the early 20th century. But there's a field called epigenetics that I'm sure you're familiar with. And epigenetics is how the genetic makeup of us can be changed if some very horrible trauma happens. And this horrible trauma happened to most Jews, numerous horrible traumas, and happened to the Black community. And it has an impact in mental health, illnesses, all kinds of things that kind of play out in our body. And we've experienced it, and every time we re-experience the trauma in some way. And I'm talking about Black people, if they experience some kind of hatred and us, that we get re-traumatized. I mean, it's in our bodies, and I don't know, probably going to take a long time until it changes. But I think that's a really important piece for us and for them, maybe something we have in common.
Yeah, one of my favorite aspects of, I mentioned that I do a Seder each year, and the teachings from the Seder that really resonate with me is that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the idea that Jews should experience injustice towards other people as if it is being perpetrated towards us, right? And I think that is such a powerful idea. It's one that I think comports well with the Braver Angels ethos. And yeah, it makes me lament the rifts that have especially recently with what we've seen publicly between Black communities and Jewish communities. The idea that we are being pitted against one another and seemingly, and in some people's minds, for the benefit of those who would just like to oppress both of us to gain from it. So that's a really sad aspect of this. Rina mentioned her favorite point of agreement from the workshop. Randy, I wanted to see if there was something that you wanted to talk about, a point of agreement that really resonated with you.
Yeah, and actually I was surprised about this one, but it's here, and maybe I'm misreading it, Rina, that criticism of Israel is a characteristic of anti-Semitism. Again, criticism is okay when Israel is treated differently from the rest of the world. And I think we agreed on that one.
We did.
Okay.
When Israel is, as I understand it, when, there are conferences at the UN that the whole focus is on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and condemning Israel for the occupation, which it deserves to be condemned for, but there are so many other things going on around the world. So, I think that's what we meant by that statement, that it can be anti-Semitic to single out Israel in a way that kind of galvanizes the world's energy. Yeah. I'd like to see the world galvanized to help make peace.
Yes, that would thank you. I'm with you on that one. I was thinking about the fact that this soccer tournament is taking place in Qatar, and the whole world is there playing soccer, but they have human rights violations in Qatar that nobody cared about, and I'm saying, well, that's not right. And they played there anyway. So, and there are numerous stories like that where human rights violations are ignored in so many countries, even democracies, and somehow there's an outsized amount of importance that's put on Israel. And I would like the energy to be put on them making peace. We can't do it for them, obviously, but that's what I'd like to.
Yeah, there was during the workshop, the Common Ground workshop, I personally expressed some discomfort with Israel's policies. I do lean blue, and so some of my beliefs about Israel, are somewhat typical of more progressives. I actually call myself a liberal, but yeah, I lean that way pretty strongly. And an Orthodox Jew lives in my community. I'm in Irvine. And he approached me and he told me that he was really upset by what I had said. And we sat down face to face and had a great conversation about it. And I think we came away with a better understanding of one another's perspectives. But what was really reinforced to me, I think, was this very point that he was afraid that I was holding Israel to a different standard than other parts of the world. And I do have my major issues with settlement policy, right? That's my biggest misgiving about the state of Israel. But I also recognize that Israel has been a force for positive in the region, in the world, and giving that short shrift, I understand, right? Can seem to many people like I am denying the contributions that Israel has made to the world and the value that the country has. And I clearly also, I have issues with the idea of a Jewish state, but I also, very strongly recognize that the history behind it and the need for it, right, is really relevant to that question. So these are really complex issues.
Very complex. And what you raised, Randy, is how emotional this is for Jews. Yes. It's just incredible. I was talking about this with Bill Doherty, and he came up with a great analogy, as he does. He said that it's like Mother Israel, and Jews on the right are like, Mom is great, she's fabulous, we love her, we adore her. Jews on the left are like, yeah, but she really needs to take her meds, and there's really some problems here, and we have to face the problems. And it's kind of like a family, like that feeling of like really wanting the love, and then the other side really wanting things to be better, and we kind of rub up against each other in that way. It's so interesting.
And even though we rub up against each other, I think there's still a love of mother.
Yeah.
And a recognition of, it was interesting. I was in Israel over the summer with my granddaughter and my husband, and we went to Theater Herzl's. There's a new Theater Herzl museum now. Theater Herzl was the father of Zionism, basically. He saw the writing on the wall before World War II, before the Holocaust. And he said, Jews have to get out of Eastern Europe, and because it's dangerous and we're all going to get killed. And he was sort of the founder of the State of Israel. And our guide was a progressive Jew, frankly, and took us into the museum. And when they got to the part in the museum of Theodor Herzl's death, I turned around and his whole face was quivering and the tears were coming down his eyes. And he's very strongly in favor of Palestinians and Israelis getting along and all of that. But there's a strong feeling about the importance of Israel to the Jewish people. But I think the bottom line in our talk today is it's not just about Israel, but we're going to disagree and we're going to continue to disagree. But I think it's communicating to people in Brave Angels and hopefully outside of Brave Angels, maybe who are not Jewish, some of whom are Jewish, that we really are scared that there is a problem in this country. And the problem is coming from the right and the left. I recognize it's coming from the right. I'll say that, but it's coming from the left too. And mostly the fringes. And that's where things get dangerous, is on the fringes. And we have to talk about it. Maybe we have to talk about it with other oppressed groups. Maybe we have to talk about it, with people who feel slighted by Jews, like you said, Rina. Yeah, let's talk about it. But let's not ignore this. I mean, because if we ignore it and it goes underground, it festers and it becomes a wound. And I think we need to really talk.
And I also want to say there are two lines that worry me. One is violence. Like anytime there's threat of violence or there's actual violence, that crosses a line in terms of anti-Semitism, a really important line. The other is when political leaders don't condemn it, allow it, turn the other way. And that is really also really dangerous. And I think we're in a situation where that's happening as well.
Yeah, so we're getting close to the close of this, and Randy, I appreciate your kind of summation of what you're taking away from this conversation. I think that's an important aspect of this. So, Rina, did you want to talk about what you're taking away, and then Paul and I can take our turns to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we did something really remarkable and wonderful in having that conversation of Reds and Blue Jews, and it was both satisfying and unsatisfying. It was satisfying because we discovered how much we could come to agreement with, that we all care about the safety of Jews. We all care about fighting anti-Semitism, and is unsatisfying because we're a people that disagrees a lot, and that's a part of us. And maybe that's something that is a wonderful part of us because we're willing to face things. And so I hope that we can bring this conversation to Braver Angels with that spirit of what we were able to do.
Yeah, Randy, was there anything else that you wanted to add about what you were taking away from this?
Well, one thing is that we say we Jews disagree, but we can disagree with each other and really care about each other. Yeah. I mean, I really care about Rina, and I know she really cares about me, and we really disagree about stuff. So I just want to say that, and I'd like to see that among us and between us and other people. Let's disagree and let's learn about each other and listen respectfully with curiosity, which is what Braver Angels is all about, and care about each other. That's it.
Yeah. Paul, do you want to go ahead and give your wrap up? What are you taking away?
Well, Randy, as you're the only non-therapist in the group, I am the only non-Jew in the group. But I guess I will say I'm a huge fan of Israel. I love Israel. I love Jews in general. There are specific Jews who I love as individuals. I have to admit there are a few Jews I've known in my life who I didn't particularly care for, but it was as individuals. I'm just aware of so many things we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about cultural capital, that Jews are people who have been people of the book for thousands of years, and how that legacy has led to a lot of power and wealth, I believe. We didn't talk about victimhood culture and how strange it is that Jews who are very, very high on the list of those who have been victims are not recognized as victims in our current victimhood culture. So it's just a vast topic. But I find myself, I really appreciate the spirit that everybody has brought to this. And Rina and Randy, Randy Freeman, I know you have put a lot of work into this, a lot of thought. Randy Leo's also put a lot of thought into it. So I guess I want to end on a note of gratitude for allowing me to be a part of this.
And I love those sentiments, Paul. I was also reflecting on the cultural aspects of Jewishness that I've really come to value. I mean, I mentioned at the top that in recent years I've gotten closer to my Jewish identity, and I think that this is, some of the things that you've mentioned have been the reasons why, and also the Jewish tradition of argument, I think, is an amazing tradition. I joked before this, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and that's actually something that is a very tangible part of Jewish culture. It's part of the Talmudic tradition of argument between rabbis. What does the Torah mean, actually, right? And that tradition really fosters such a rich debate and the ability to fight one another tooth and nail rhetorically, and then come together after and reaffirm how much we love each other, right? And that is totally the spirit of Braver Angels that I really connect with. So I also really laud Rina and Randy for coming together. Obviously, you've highlighted some of your differences. And those differences will likely remain for the long term, but the value that you see in one another and what you can add to one another's lives, and how that has created value for us as an organization through this workshop, through your leadership in bringing Jewish members together, and also the goyim that we love, that we want to involve in the conversation as well, right? I think it's just such a great example of Braver Angels at its best. So yeah, I think we all thank you for that. And with that, we'll bring the podcast to a close. I want to ask all of our listeners to go to braverangels.org. If you're not already a member, we would love for you to join us. Subscribe to our podcast. You can find it on YouTube and a whole bunch of audio platforms where you get podcasts. Comment on this one. So there's a rich conversation. And so we have, many Jews, many goyim, and many, many, many opinions. That would be great. And then also, if you loved listening to this, we would love a 5-star rating on our podcast. So with that, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to Rina, Randy, and my co-host Paul. And it's been a great experience. So see you all in the next pod.